Hey, this is Joel Duff. Welcome back to the channel. And this is an episode of Unscripted Duff, meaning I do have one thing that I need to respond to. I'm going to respond to a comment that I received on my last video. I need to qualify some things that I said in the last video, and I want to spend a few minutes reflecting upon, how I interact through this channel with Young Earth Creationist ministries like Answers in Genesis. And then after that, it's like a free for all. I don't know exactly where I'll go. I've got in my head. I have some ideas of things I'd like to say, but we'll see how they come out. All right. So what I need to do, what I need to take care of right away is I need to update you on my last video. My last video is this one right up here, Answers in Genesis. Either, I gave you two options, either they don't read the literature or they don't give credit to other young earth creationists. And I said, those are your two doors you need to choose. Like, which of these options? And I asked, are there any other options? Are there any other ways of viewing what they have done here? And you're like, hey, I didn't watch the video. What are you talking about, Joel? I'm talking about this video over here by Answers in Genesis. They're scrambling. This is Answers News. They're talking about a recent report of collagen tissue in Edmontosaurus, which is a dinosaur. And they're saying that evolutionists are scrambling to try to answer or respond to that. And the big deal about that publication is that this description of collagen in dinosaur bones the research was performed and published by Young Earth Creationist in a secular journal. And I was rather astounded that this was not made known by Answers in Genesis when they talked about this on their Answers News program. So they have 3 hosts that get up and talk about this discovery, and they don't mention the authors, and they don't mention who did this research. They don't acknowledge that it was Young Earth Creationist. Right? Ken Ham writes a blog post, another dinosaur soft tissue find, in which he talks about researchers using advanced spectrometry and DNA sequencing to detect bone collagen. Right? And there again, Ken Ham doesn't acknowledge the author's affiliations. And I found that curious. I found that curious because I thought it was a wonderful chance to acknowledge that Young Earth Creationists are doing cutting edge research here. They're using advanced techniques. They have set out to find collagen or let's say characterize collagen in dinosaur bones. They've written it up and they got published in Analytical Chemistry. And as I said, the article is, I think, perfectly good. I don't have any problem with the data that's presented there in that article at all. And I thought it was a missed opportunity for one Young Earth Creationist to, celebrate the fact that other Young Earth Creationists are getting published. And not only getting published, but this particular article was picked up in a whole bunch of different popular press articles. And so they're getting a lot of play out of this in the popular media. And so I was like, wow, I really like a missed opportunity. And I thought there was something going on here, right? Either Ken Ham didn't actually read the original research, or he just doesn't want to give credit to ICR, because these are 2 Young Earth Creationists that are affiliated with Institute for Creation Research. Okay, that's the backstory. All right, so for those of you who didn't watch my prior video. All right, so I'm here today to backtrack a little bit. Right? I felt it was necessary to step back, and that's because I got let's just say I got a message from a source of mine that suggested another scenario, one that I hadn't really fleshed out and hadn't really thought through, as a possible reason why Answers in Genesis did not mention who the researchers were. Now, I had mentioned that ICR, I had noticed that ICR, Institute for Creation Research, I had noticed that they haven't actually made a big deal about their own publication yet, right? On their website, they have yet to mention this particular article. And I said, well, maybe maybe they just don't want to call attention to it because it's getting so much popular press. So let it sort of play out in the popular press and then come in and say hey, look what we did here. And this particular source of mine, who's a Young Earth Creationist and is a practicing professional Young Earth Creationist, not just, somebody who aspires to be a creationist or follows Young Earth Creationism and had this idea. No, this is an active young Earth creationists who's actively engaged in, let's call it young Earth creationist research. And they suggested to me that actually they were quite convinced that Ken Ham and the host of Answers News were very aware of who wrote the paper, all right, of what a couple of the authors' affiliations are, being young Earth creationists. So they suggested that door number one is clearly off the table. It's got to be something more related to door number two. And they suggested that this isn't nefarious. This isn't like bad blood between the two organizations. Now, not to say there isn't a real rift between Answers in Genesis and Institute for Creation Research. Right. They strongly disagree on creation models, and there's a number of different personality issues between the two, between members of those two organizations. They disagree on the post-flood flood boundary very vehemently. They also disagree on how biological diversification of the created kinds occurred. The former, Answers in Genesis, employs natural selection very freely to explain how species have come to be. Whereas ICR calls natural selection basically a tool of the devil. It's a heretical idea that it's something that doesn't really exist. Natural selection isn't a real, literally say they isn't a real thing. And they aspire to this biological model called continuous environmental tracking. All right, but we don't need to get into that. You go search my channel if you want to see videos on those issues. All right, so I was leaning to this sort of like, hey, there's such a fracture between the two that Answers in Genesis doesn't want to even acknowledge that this paper was published by this competing organization over here, Institute for Creation Research. But my source suggested that, nope, they do know who wrote it and that they're actually in this case being sensitive, right? They're being sensitive to the fact that there's multiple co-authors on that particular paper. And some of those, for one thing, some of those co-authors might not really want to have their names called attention to because they're not individuals who have necessarily been publicly identified as young Earth creationists. So there could be a bit of protectionism in terms of the authors. They don't want to make a big deal about this being young Earth creationist research at this point and putting other people in danger. Individuals who did Answers News would have known that these are a couple of the authors of this paper are young Earth creationists. As I mentioned before, it's not just a couple of the authors. It's the lab that was generated. That lab is run by young Earth creationists. Now, Stephen Taylor, I'm going to say his name because he's widely known as a young Earth creationist, and he's not, exactly going to hide behind that. And he has, a full position there at Liverpool and all that stuff. So I'm not putting him in any danger of like outing him as a young Earth creationist. What I didn't realize is that he has an association and has collaborated with those at Answers in Genesis. And really, honestly, I should have known that. All right. I really should have known that. I mean, I take myself to be somewhat an expert on young Earth creationist organizations. I follow everything, read all their material. It should have dawned on me that Stephen Taylor has done stuff with Answers in Genesis. And this is bad on me. I saw this news article. I watched this particular program, and I sort of jumped on this opportunity very quickly to say something about Answers to News. I've been kind of looking for an opportunity to, again, talk about Answers to News and how shallow the analysis is there. Right. And so I saw this as an opportunity to show that, like, hey, they're not even aware enough of their own like literature to even have recognized the authors on this particular paper. But I think I'm definitely wrong about that. I think it's a conscious choice not to mention these particular authors, not to mention this is a young Earth creationist. Some of you might be thinking, Joel, that's kind of a nuanced perspective. Your two options weren't that far off. But I was really pushing a kind of a conspiracy theory there that Ken Ham was completely aware of who the authors were and that he just out of, kind of in a petty way. I mean, I think that's probably the impression you got from the way I talked about it. Kind of in a petty way was just doesn't want to acknowledge anyone from Institute for Creation Research. And now that I recognize that Stephen Taylor has done stuff for Answers in Genesis and Wood has a good relationship with them, and that's sort of like what my source is saying. It's like that relationship is not broken. And so there wouldn't be any reason why they wouldn't mention Stephen Taylor, and they certainly know that it is. So the very fact that they did not mention it, that like you've got Answers in News folks, you've got the writing team of Ken Ham, and you have Ken Ham himself, and none of them are, suggesting that that this is a young Earth creationist who wrote this particular article or was responsible for the research. That isn't an accident. And it's not an accident in the sense of they didn't want to acknowledge ICR. It's not an accident that they're trying to protect and just not make a big deal about this being a creationist article. I do think they'll wait until later, and when the sort of the dust settles and this paper gets acknowledgments and some citations, that maybe at that point that this is a young Earth creationist article published in secular literature and in a peer-reviewed journal. Right. And they wouldn't be wrong to be happy about that. And the last little bit that suggests to me that this is the correct interpretation of what's going on here is that ICR, as I said before, they haven't said anything yet. All right. So they themselves are being very careful about not promoting this article like right away, like as soon as it came out. It's been out for a couple of weeks and they have yet to say anything about it publicly. So I guess what I've been doing is I've been kind of outing, this particular article as being a young Earth creationist publication. And probably, if this is really what they're doing is not wanting to talk about it right now and to sort of wait and give it a chance to marinate out there, then, I guess I'm outing him there, and I'm also making another video now, which makes it seem like it's worse. But I kind of am doing this video because I'm trying to think about my approach to what I'm doing with Young Earth Creationist. Okay, well, this is obviously unscripted material because I feel like I'm not really, making a strong point here about why I'm making a follow-up video. What's so different about what I just said than maybe what I said in the original video? I think the problem is in the original video, I'm feeling a slight tinge of guilt about basically setting up this, like, here you got two choices. Either Ken Ham is obfuscating, or he is ignorant. And this person who wrote me, and they were very nice about it. But they were just pointing out that there are alternative ways of viewing why people have said what they have said. And that, and they didn't say this, but, they very well could have said this. Like, Joel, you're looking at it as if like you don't trust answers in Genesis, so therefore you're looking for the worst possible solutions, right? You're not giving them the benefit of the doubt. And when I read that, I reacted as, you're right. I didn't. I really was like, trying to look for another opportunity to show that, yes, they're always manipulating the truth, right? They're always manipulating their audience. Part of that comes from the fact that I watched the rest of that particular video, that particular episode of Answers News, and I think there was some really serious problems there. But I happened to pick out a thing that really wasn't a serious problem, and I probably made a mountain out of a molehill in this case. It's really a question of whether you can read somebody's motives and how much you should be trying to read into their words, right? I only had their words, and so I was reading into what they could mean by those words. But eventually you can't help but get into like, well, what's the motivation behind like forgetting not including this word, or why did you include this specific word, and so forth. And you're bound to be wrong at times in terms of interpreting what's going on in other people's heads. I mean, people are wrong about me all the time in terms of what they think that I'm thinking based on the words that I've said, because sometimes I'm a poor communicator. Right. So, I mean, that's my fault as well. I admit I get really frustrated. And I've been extra frustrated in the last month or two with young Earth creationist literature. And Ken Ham in particular. And so I was at kind of a point a few days ago where this particular article came out and it really just kind of pushed me over the edge. And I always regret it when I kind of like am a little more hyper aggressive, which I know some of you'd say like, oh, Joel, you're like that. You're nothing compared to what other people would do to eviscerate some of the Answers in Genesis material. But for me, that was pretty strong. I had a pretty strong take on that. And there's an aspect of, the stronger the take, the more views you're going to get on a YouTube video. And that's just the sad nature of the world we live in terms of how to attract viewers and so forth. People want strong takes, right? They want polarized stuff. And so here I am coming back with it probably wasn't that big of a deal, right? I made it into a dichotomous choice, and your two choices were both not good, right? It shed a bad light on Ken Ham either way you went, either door you entered. When really maybe there was kind of a door in between the two that was like not quite as horrible as the other ones. I don't think it's like, fantastic, but I don't think I'm back to thinking this wasn't a huge deal. Just so I can maintain the interest level here and do what I just said is the problem with YouTube. I will say something about Answers News, which is a little more provocative. Right. So now that I've apologized for being too aggressive with this particular story, I just have some basic things that have irked me for a while. And one of them is that, when I listen to Answers in News, and maybe I shouldn't expect something more than this, but I am just shocked at how ill-equipped, how incredibly ill-equipped some of the hosts are for dealing with the subjects that they talk about. All right. They just cannot talk about them in a meaningful way. There's no depth there. There's zero nuance. It seems like everything that they say is just, is pulled out of a script from Young Earth Creationist, answers book, right? They take whatever news story is out there and they just come up with sort of the same lines over and over and over and over again as their responses. There's one particular member of that crew who sits in the middle, who is especially bad at that. It seems like they can't think of anything interesting to say about any piece of research. All they can do is just like read the standard lines, Answers in Genesis lines that they've grown up reading over and over and over again. And it's really frustrating because the only reason I would want to watch that show, and I'm probably I'm totally the wrong person to be watching it, right? Is that I'm interested in learning something. I'm interested in learning, like, how do you deal with like a really difficult new discovery? How would you put it into the framework of Young Earth Creationism? And I'm always left with, oh, that's all. I mean, that's your entire response. It's so, eighth grade level. But you have a couple PhDs up there, right? There's 2 PhDs out of 3 individuals on the Answers News program that are answering questions and reading stories. You have somebody with a medical science degree, you have a paleontologist. Well, sadly, it's the medical science degree that often is much better at describing the paleontological results than the paleontologist, who really struggles to describe, aspects of taphonomy and how different fossils have been, found. So sorry, that's the same word, taphonomy, and how fossils are formed. But they just don't seem to have a good grasp on the scientific literature at all. And so that's why when I hear them talk about these stories, and then I'm just like, do you read the original research? Do you, that is where my claim comes from. Like, they seem to read popular press, overviews of literature. And I think part of it's because I don't think they understand the original literature. And it's kind of understandable. It's a paleontologist and somebody else with a medical degree and now they're talking about all kinds of different stories, right? They're way outside their field, like way outside. I don't know why they don't get Nathaniel Jensen in there and some others that they have on staff who might have more expertise in some of these areas, but they push out individuals who are just, like I said before, they're ill-equipped to answer these questions, other than they are actually really well equipped to answer the questions if all you want to do is give a generic, easiest way for me to say it is like, when you ask a question in Sunday school and it's like, you're looking for some sort of like interesting responses and somebody who's really thinking through something. And then their answer is, well, God did it. Right. Okay. All right. Oh, well, I can't really, say you're wrong, as a Sunday school teacher, you're like, yes, that's right. Yes, God did it. God's responsible, but we want to think a little bit more about how does God do things? Too simple of an answer to what are very complex questions at times. Now, I know you might be sitting here saying to yourself, Joel, come on. I mean, look, you're complaining about somebody who has a PhD and they're way outside their field and they're not able to answer questions. And like, what are you doing here? What are you doing here in your channel? You're talking about geology. You're talking about physics. You're talking about astronomy. All of these different climatology. And you're not an expert in all those areas. You got a PhD in biology, and your PhD in biology is in a really specific area. How would you respond to that? How do I respond to that? I will say I have a lot of experience, a lot more experience than the members of Answers and News there. If Answers and News wants to invite me down and have me do a program, I can absolutely do everything that they do. I can give all the same responses. I mean, I can pull stuff out of young Earth creationist literature. I probably have a better grasp on the young Earth creationist literature than they do. And so I think I could even tie in some better answers from young Earth creationist material than they're providing. So, hey, like I could do that. I mean, even though I only have this PhD in one small area. So I know it can be done, right? I know that they can do a better job. But I also have a ton more years of experience. But here's the other thing. And this is the only reason I bring this up. I want to toot my own horn. I'm not trying to say like, wow, look at me. I'm so intelligent and all that. I feel really dumb a lot of times. I know I'm not terribly articulate. My videos are 45 minutes longer than they should be because I'm not precise with my language and I'm overly wordy. But what I do have is, and it's because of my job, all right, I have a ton of experience from having taught a lot of classes on a number of different subjects, and I've done them many, many times, and that helps me. I mean, you're going to say like, Joel, you should be even better at it if you've done that much teaching in terms of conveying concepts. But the bigger thing is I sit on a lot of PhD committees. All right, so I sit on a lot of committees for students. Right now I'm on at least 6 different PhD committees. All right, and that means that there's a PhD student working on their doctorate, and I have a PhD student myself. All right, so I in that case I am the advisor overseeing their program and their research, and they have a committee of other faculty. And what's great about it is you get together your committee. We try to encourage our students, get them together right away, make use of your committee. Here's 5 PhDs sitting in a room, and you get to talk about what your ideas are, what you would like to do. And then we all get to like, hey, maybe have you thought of that? Have you thought of that? Have you thought of that? Tell me about, the background and, why you're going to do your research. And, we spend hours talking about this stuff, right? Wrangling over topics. And it's really, a lot of times you're right on the cutting edge of like, oh, well, here's everything that's known right now. And here's what I'm going to contribute. Because, right, the PhD is trying to contribute new knowledge to whatever field you're interested in. And so I'm sitting on that committee, and I'll be sitting on that committee with like a biochemist and maybe an anatomist and a cell physiology type person, right? Because it's an integrative project. We have an integrative biology PhD, right? They need to integrate across many different fields, their projects, very explicitly. They must do that, and usually have members of their committee that are outside the department. So I'm sitting there, and so I'm on several committees that have a science educator, right? Somebody who knows education and pedagogy. And they might have a project in which they're exploring how to communicate their topic in addition to doing like their molecular biology. And so I might be with an anthropologist or a geologist or a biochemist, and I'm listening to them, talk about, use their set of knowledge to address a question and to probe, that student's knowledge. And I get to do that. And basically I get to sit and learn from 4 other PhDs outside of my field and listen to them argue about like the thing, like the most recent stuff that's known on particular topics. And that includes, I've been on a committee. I've been a PhD advisor. Not that this is my expertise, all right? But we had an advisor leave the university, so I had to take over as advisor for a student. That student was working on melanosomes in fossil birds, right? Actually, fossil dinosaurs that are birds, but let's not get into that whole debate. Let's just call them the feathered dinosaurs, all right? And so I get to see and have I'm right there next to another world expert, all right, PhD on fossilized feathers, right? And feathered dinosaurs, who have themselves and the student worked on fossils from China, right? And made discoveries on those. And I get to hear that discussion. And I get to ask questions. I get to sit around and just like ask all kinds of questions, like everything I've ever wanted to ask about those dinosaur fossils. We learned about how they were obtained, right? And all the different things that go into that, and like how you would actually do things with, all the arrangements with the Chinese and how you gain access to this type of stuff. And then the specific techniques used to identify melanosomes and other structures that would have been in the feathers. Right? Get to see the whole publication process through, to see the reviews and all that. That is it's one of the best parts of my job, to be able to just explore different things that are like pretty far outside my wheelhouse in terms of my own training, but I'm basically being trained all the time in lots of other fields, right? So Antarctic research, research on different plants, different animals. I mean, I've been at all kinds of different topics. I'm on another committee right now in which the student is involved in origin of life research. It's a very specific topic, very specific type of molecule that they're looking at, how you make that particular molecule that relates to questions about the origin of life. And so I've had really amazing conversations with that student because they know the literature really well, right? So I can find out like what is the most recent stuff going on in that particular part of the research world in the origin of life. It's really about polymers. How do you link together long chains of molecules and different techniques for doing that? So they're more of a chemist than anything else. But the student also is a biologist because it's an organic molecule. And they're an amazing biologist themselves. I mean, that person's knowledge about biology is incredible, but they're also doing cross-disciplinary work. Anyway, that's the, I haven't had a lot of chance to talk about that on this channel. And I don't know why that came to me as I was thinking about these individuals that are doing Answers News. And, I kind of feel for them sometimes because they are sometimes talking about topics that they really are could be very overwhelming topics. And I think that's why they just stick to the summaries, right? All their reporting usually is, well, here's something that was in, Newsweek or earth.com or, any one of these like science reporting sites. Right. But those are boiled down, simplified versions. And unfortunately, here's the problem with simplified versions. The problem with those simplified versions is that all the nuance is gone. They make a big deal about a few pieces of data, and it's some kind of science writer or PR person that is putting together the information. Sometimes the scientist is barely involved. And if they are, they'll say like, well, they'll have they'll have an interview with them. And I've done this for some of our works, some students of mine, and that you'll talk and talk and talk and tell them about all these like interesting things. And that it's like, there's caveats to things, right? It's like, yes, we got this result, but it only counts for this because if there's this other condition that could happen or whatever, the PR person doesn't want to they don't want to have to write all that. They just want to write a splashy title and say like, yeah, this article shows blah. And it's always overblown. It's like why I'm always disappointed when I see news headlines. It's like, man, that sounds like an awesome, discovery. And then you go you read the article and it still sounds pretty awesome, but I'm already like, yeah, I can tell it's not really the same as what, what was pitched. And then you go read the original article. And sometimes the original article is like way better, but it's not usually what the PR article is, right? And so now, okay. So why am I saying that? Because Answers in Genesis is using something that has gone through several different filters. And if they're not going back to the original research papers, in some cases they may not have access to them because if they don't have subscriptions, and it's really pricey. So I kind of get that. But a lot of stuff is open access now. But I don't think that these individuals have the ability to read the original research and actually understand a lot of it. And that is a big deficiency for them. So despite the fact they have PhDs, they're reading outside their area. I read outside my area all the time, but I've done so much of that. And I have, a feel for how to figure out what the basics are of the paper pretty quickly. So they're really handicapped in that way. And it really comes out as you listen to some of their research overviews. All right. I don't want to get into analyzing all the problems with that recent Answers News video, but that was a painful one to listen to as they went through. Let me just bring up one thing that bothered me about this recent article. They're scrambling, right? And they're saying like these scientists, they're scrambling to try to figure out this collagen thing. You know what? Since they pick up collagen, they made it sound like this is like some amazing discovery and nobody knows how to react to it. And they're astounded. I mean, even the PR release, talking about how astounded scientists are about this discovery. No, I said in my other thing that we've known that there's collagen preserved in dinosaur bones since the 1960s. Right? What they're doing in this article is they're conflating, what they're doing in this video here is they're conflating collagen with the discovery of like blood vessels, remains of blood cells, other osteocytes, others, in other words, other things that Mary Schweitzer found, and then other subsequent discoveries of other types of soft tissue, which seem less likely to be preserved than collagen. I mean, collagen for a long time has been known to be pretty well preserved in a lot of different ancient organisms. So this is not shocking, right? We're not scrambling around trying to figure out what happened with collagen, right? But in the Answers News response, these hosts don't seem to differentiate. They do not differentiate the story of collagen versus the story of other soft tissues or other cellular debris or other, really to be more broad, say, other biomolecules that have been preserved that arguably you could say are less likely to be preserved. Collagen, rather sturdy molecule. There's ways to cross-link it, and about a variety of different ways you can preserve collagen, especially in the location that it's found in these bones. And so, of course, that's what I mean, but they don't have any nuance to them. And I don't even think it really even crossed their minds that, like, yes, we've taught, there's different discoveries of different biomolecules under different conditions. Some are more surprising than others. And collagen is not particularly surprising. And they don't seem to know about the history of work on collagen. They just kind of like, oh, soft tissues, right? Like Ken Ham's, more discoveries of soft tissues, as if that is equivalent to a discovery of some other biomolecule that we know less about how it would be preserved. All right, so that's what I mean by not being aware enough of the literature, and maybe they're also just, they don't care, all right, to be aware, because it doesn't, again, it helps the story to make it all sound like, yeah, these secular scientists, they're bamboozled, by this finding of collagen. They don't want to explain the details because then it's not nearly as exciting as it first sounded. It's kind of like what I'm doing here, right? I want to be really provocative and interesting, and so I don't want to give you all the nuances because you'll get bored if I give you all the nuances. And that's what I actually do try to do in my videos. That's why they're an hour long and they are a little bit rambly, but I'm trying to get around to showing you some more depth to like what we know and some of the nuances of young earth creationists arguments, more than you would hear on Answers News. That's explicitly what I am not, is trying to be Answers News. Unscripted stuff needs to come to an end because I've run out of things to say. So there we are. Thanks. We'll see you when we see you. Goodbye.